My guest today needs no introduction. It's Mark Knowles. You know him on Tennis Channel as a commentator, as a consultant, as a coach, as the former one-time world number one. And he was number one for many weeks. And he joins me here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio and also a commentator on the Challenger Series, a place that, Mark, you've at times worked that series. You know all too well what that's like with the USTA. I'm excited to have you on to tell your story. Thanks so much for taking some time.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Always great to chat and kind of think back and reflect on a couple of things that have transpired throughout my career.
One of the things I want to think back at, and actually it's happening in real time now, is how proud you are of your son Graham and what he's doing as a quarterback right now.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, obviously, as parents, you're proud of your kids no matter what, right? You obviously love your kids more than anything you could have ever imagined. Between my wife and I, we're obviously very sports orientated. My wife played some high school basketball as well and loves sports. So, we're a very sports centered family. I like to keep the kids active. I think it's just a great way to kind of pass the time, and also good life lessons are learned through various sports. And it's exciting. Graham, my oldest, has taken more of the football, basketball path, didn't want to go down the tennis route. And it's been exciting, especially in football. He's doing really well as a quarterback, and it's challenging, but it's exciting. He's got, he's a really good athlete, and he's got a lot of attributes that will give him a chance to be successful. And then I have a 14-year-old son who plays football, wide receiver though. Hopefully they'll get a connection one day. Plays a lot of hoops as well, loves basketball, but also likes tennis. My 14-year-old plays a bit of tennis. Obviously, it's a struggle, the individual sport as opposed to the team sports with all his friends. But he still has a genuine love for tennis. So we still play, try to get out there maybe twice a week and, at his leisure. We've never been about forcing our kids to do anything. And I have a daughter as well, 11 years old, who plays basketball, plays tennis. And then she told me some great things the other day where she really likes golf. So as a father who likes to play golf, those were some of the best words she's ever told me. So hopefully I can just head to the range and everybody will be happy if I spend a couple hours with her on the range every week. So we're pretty busy. It's fun. My wife and I love sports, and weekends are a lot of carpooling, going from sport to sport. We try to catch as many practices, as many games as possible, and we know how fast it goes. So we try to enjoy it as much as we can.
What is the difference between Mark Knowles as a competitor on the range, on the golf course, compared to the one who was number one in doubles?
Yeah, I'm a lot. It's interesting. When I played, I obviously was kind of, I was pretty much two personalities, right? Pretty mellow, laid back guy from the Bahamas off the court, pretty easygoing. Whereas I was pretty fierce, pretty intense on the court. No doubt, I definitely had two different personalities, and I think post retirement, I'm pretty mellow, right? I'm pretty relaxed. The competition's still there, but I'm not nearly as competitive as I once was. I almost get the feeling that it's interesting because I have a couple of friends that, that are retired as well from the tennis world, and interesting to see how their competition has either stayed the same or kind of dwindled. And I think mine's dwindled a little bit just because I think you're in this vacuum for so long. For me, having started playing tennis when I was about 3 years old, went to the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy when I was 10. I mean, I've basically been competing my entire life until I retired at 41 years of age. So that's a lot of competing. So I kind of needed a little step back from that. I mean, I think it's still there. You can still tap into it every now and then. Of course, if you're used to competing, nobody likes to lose, right? The greatest saying ever is that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And that's the truth, really. The sun is brighter when you win, you feel better when you win, and that's just the way it is. But the reality is losing is part of life as well. So you need to learn how to deal with that. So I still love to compete, but it's a different level completely. It's not I don't think it ruins my mood or changes my day.
There was a lot of winning for you at an early age. Obviously, your mom, Vicky, teaching, and you as a youngster saw that. How much do you think your drive, your desire to be great is in a way trying to impress your mom over the course of your career? When you reflect on those early formative moments and then the way to which you're able to fuel your career from there?
Well, I think there was a tremendous respect. You know, my mom was from England. She played at Wimbledon. You know, she was a good amateur player back in the day. When she moved to the Bahamas, she was obviously the best female player by a good stretch in the Bahamas. And, you know, so it was great kind of growing up in that environment. And her, along with my dad, they ran the best like summer camps. So, you know, I was introduced to tennis by them and not forced or anything, just kind of by, you know, by environment, really. You know, they ran a tennis club and, you know, we didn't have much money growing up. We were relatively poor. So, I mean, it was just, you know, that was kind of the babysitting, right? Tennis courts were my babysitters. So I would just, you know, grab a racket and there was a wall at one of the courts towards the end of the facility. And I would literally just, I think I'd probably hit there 8, 10 hours a day. Literally, I would hear stories when I got older from other, you know, from adults saying, like, you know, this little blonde kid would just stay at the end and hit on the wall all day. So, you know, I really loved it. And I think you always want your parents' approval, right? So that's obviously a driving force. Obviously, was tennis was, you know, the fabric of our family. But I know for me, you know, my drive came from the fact that, like I said, we didn't have much money growing up. I mean, it was, you know, we were happy, we had a great time, but we did not have anything, really anything of consequence. It was a very simple life. You know, a great life was in the Bahamas, which is not a bad place, but you know, we were pretty simple in that regard, and you know, there is quite a bit of wealth in the Bahamas as well. So I felt, you know, I felt kind of compelled that, hey, if I'm going to ever live a life like some of my peers at the time, or their families, you know, my way was through tennis. That's where I kind of figured I was pretty good at it and I had a shot. And so I worked as hard as I could. You know, I was given a great opportunity at the age of 10 from the legend Nick Bollettieri to go over to their academy. And you know, it sounds crazy, but even at that young age, I knew this was my shot. You know, I didn't know if I'd get that shot again, and I knew if I stayed in the Bahamas, I wouldn't have the same drive. I wouldn't have the same, you know, motivation that I would if I went to a place like that. And you know, honestly, you know, when you reflect back on, I think when all athletes reflect back on their careers, there's certain moments that really stand out. You know, and that was probably the second moment. You know, the first was obviously my family being very supportive and creating a nice environment with the sport of tennis. But second was Nick Bollettieri, you know, giving me that platform to go there, give me a full scholarship. You know, we could never afford to go to a school like that. You know, so he gave me a platform, an ability to see what talent I had and see what level I could get to. So, you know, that was the driving force. And I really think that, you know, we hear about it all the time, obviously athletes in other sports as well. When they're from humble backgrounds and don't have that much kind of, that's the driving force, which I think also that was the good thing, but also the bad thing is I was really hard on myself. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I was very tough on myself. And, you know, sometimes that can be debilitating.
Post match, how would you sort of show that you were really hard on yourself mentally? Even if you won, what was going through your head in the sense of, as you said, how hard you could be on yourself and not letting maybe yourself experience the moment, realize what you just did, and always looking to improve and always thinking that there's more that you could have done.
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, now in retirement, I reflect back and speak to a lot of people about it. I think all athletes and most that I've spoken to or ever conversed with, you always want more, right? There's never, you know, and you probably even think for the Roger Federers, the Rafael Nadals, the Novak Djokovic's, there's still matches they want back. There's still one more Grand Slam title they want. Whether they won 22, they think they should have won 23. You know, maybe Pete Sampras thinks he could have won 15. Like it's the same. You know, I was fortunate to win 55 tournaments in my career, but you know, sure, I won 56, I won 60, I won 65, won a couple of majors as well, but I want more. But you know, I think you do take a moment and reflect back and realize, okay, where you started, hey, well done. But I think all athletes continue to want more, and I think when you're in the moment, you just think about getting as much as you can, right? So when you do fall short, when you do lose in a final or maybe lose in a semifinal, you feel like a failure, right? Especially in a sport like tennis, which is so individual. Even if you're playing the game of doubles, it's just you and your partner where you feel like, wow, we kind of came short. So you want to amass as many successes, as many trophies as possible. And that was hard. I mean, listen, there's no doubt. I mean, I think I talk about it with some of my colleagues, you know, you don't miss the downs, that's for sure, in sport.
Ah,
You
yeah.
you really don't. You miss the highs, you miss the competition, but I do not miss the downs because they're dark times. I mean, and especially, we've seen a strong movement towards mental health. One of my colleagues, Marty Fish, obviously kind of at the forefront of it for the game of tennis. And obviously the other sports have picked up as well. But it's a real thing, especially for tennis, because it's an individual sport where you take all of the glory, but you also take all of the failure. So how you process that is very important, and it's also important to have a good kind of a good sounding board, a good support system around you. But I was never in that type of area, but I was tough on myself. I was disappointed. I felt like you feel like a failure because you have these expectations, and anything short of a title or a win is just not good enough.
When you feel that way, or in the past, Mark, you have felt that way, how has your wife stepped in and given you that pep talk? Where has she been to support you in those moments you needed her the most during, like you said, some of the dark times of your career when there was a tough loss and you needed that support system that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, my wife was instrumental, quite frankly. I mean, before I met my wife, I was playing a lot of singles, obviously, a top 100 singles player, doing well, having some good results, but probably not doing as well as I had expected to do, and maybe others had expected me to do as well. And so processing that was very difficult. And like I said, I took it out on myself. I think that I almost mentally abused myself too much. And, I think it cost me a lot more success in singles. And I was fortunate enough to meet my wife. Obviously, once you get a relationship with somebody that you love and trust, and realize that they're only going to say things and do things to help you, she was instrumental in just helping me understand, like, hey, okay, process why you're getting so angry. What can you do better? And she really helped me a lot on the mental side of the game. And
Wow.
I had gone to, we had the best sports psychologist ever at Nick Bollettieri's, Dr. Jim Lair. Worked with myself, Jim Courier, Andre, the list goes on of all the guys that were there. And Dr. Lair is still probably one of the best in his field. So we had incredible resources. But still, it wasn't until, I think, obviously my parents tried to help me as well, but it really wasn't until my wife kind of, really kind of talked through things, and we got to a really good understanding of what I should be looking to accomplish mentally on the court. And that really helped me. I think it really, then I went on, obviously, a very successful doubles career where I was number one, won, several majors and so forth. And I became a lot stronger mentally. And so now I'm such a huge advocate, not just in tennis, but in all sports. I mean, the mental side of the game it's honestly probably more important than anything. It's more important than the physical side. It's more important than technique. And I'm sure it's like that in many sports, but especially in tennis, when it's a one-on-one atmosphere, mano a mano, the mental side is so important.
When you talk about that partnership with your wife, Mark, how do you liken it to playing with a doubles partner in a match, and how you might note some similarities between the two?
Yeah, I mean, doubles partners kind of like a marriage. It's referenced all the time because you spend a lot of time together. You're trying to become a cohesive unit, right? To where you produce at your best, at your highest potential, which ultimately that's what you're trying to do in a marriage as well, trying to bring out the best in one another, and then ultimately trying to be the best parents to hopefully some kids as well. And doubles is kind of like that as well, right? You're trying to find somebody that you think would kind of match up well with you. But then once you get that partnership, once you get that relationship, it's about trying to make your partner better, and hopefully your partner can impose upon you ways that you could maybe reflect and look inward, and find ways that you can be better. And I think that's important. I played with, obviously, Daniel Nestor for most of my career, and obviously we probably had the most success, and we were great friends. He was in my wedding, I was in his wedding. We had a very good bond with sports. We were both sports fanatics with all other sports. So we had a great bond. And he was left-handed, I was right-handed. So a lot of things kind of in our weird quirk. His middle name was Mark. Another weird quirk, we have the same birthday, but I'm a year older. Like, just strange things, right? When you think about, wow, okay, we end up being one of the greatest doubles teams ever. And just out of nowhere, we had all those similarities. I also had a successful partnership with Mahesh Bhupathi, who, I don't have as many similarities with, from India. Great guy, awesome player. Our games meshed well. Obviously won some events with other players as well, like Marty Fish and Andy Roddick and guys like that. They're obviously just great players. But doubles is so important as far as becoming a cohesive unit, right? Because everyone has skills, everybody has talents, but doubles is a slightly different game, obviously, than singles because you don't decide the outcome of every shot, whereas in singles you do.
You acknowledged, Mark, and we're joined by Mark Knowles. I'm Bryan Fenley. That with your wife or whether it's a doubles partner, they sort of force you to look and reflect inwardly. How has working with Marty Fish in the past also taught you something about yourself, and how has he sort of motivated you to look inwardly as well?
Well, it's interesting. Tennis is such a team sport. I mean, sorry, such an individual sport. But you'd find a lot of tennis players prefer team sports. It's actually interesting. The great Roger Federer just retired, and he said, I actually always felt like I was a team guy. Kind of reflecting on his wife around him, his team, and so forth. Even though it was an individual sport, playing a lot of singles, he felt like he created the team environment. And you hear a lot of tennis players love to play in the Olympics, the Davis Cup atmosphere, where they feel like they're playing for more than themselves. So I think that, for Marty, it was really great for me to coach him. It was a good time. I just retired because I saw some similarities and we connected very well. We had known each other from playing against each other and kind of passing on tour. So, but we never really knew each other that intimately. And then obviously, when he asked if I would be interested in coaching him, I'd always had tremendous respect for his game, such a talented player, but felt like he also could make some strides mentally. And I think he would attest to that. And I know he has that, I took him to a different level mentally. And I think that's the great part, right? Is I've always kind of looked at it as, hey, I didn't have a perfect career and I didn't, I made mistakes. But the good news is I can help somebody else not make those mistakes, right? I can open their eyes to, okay, maybe the mental side's holding you back, or maybe the physical side, or, those types of things. And I think he had enough respect for me that when I told him, that he should be one of the best players in the world. And he realized that I wasn't just, you know, blowing hot air his direction, because I'm not going to just say that. I have a good understanding of the game. And I think that's important. And that's why I said it. I think it's important to have people around you that you respect, and where you feel like they can take you to another place, right? And I always felt like, and Marty's been great at that, right? He's always thanked me and given me a lot of credit, just saying that, and listen, I'm not hitting any of the balls. He's doing all the work.
Sure.
But I do take pride in the fact that I helped him to actually realize his full potential, got him to believe how good he could be. And that's probably something that was missing for me in my first 10 years where I was playing singles. I heard a lot of people say that I should be this, I should be that, but I never truly believed it. And if an athlete doesn't believe it, it's really hard to accomplish anything.
That's so interesting you brought that up, Mark, because it sounds like in earlier in this conversation you talked about your wife and how she helped you believe even more when it came to your tennis game, and how that person you need right by your side, and so you were there for Marty. How long do you think that took when you got to work with Marty, where you really started to see things paying off and that belief really started to resonate with him?
Well, I think it's a credit to Marty, because I think he was at a stage in his career and his life where he was looking for somebody to kind of help him and catapult him to the next level. So I think that's also important, right? He was willing to be open and willing to allow me to make an impact, because as we know, a lot of athletes at times aren't willing, right? You're not willing to be vulnerable. You're not willing to admit weaknesses. You're not willing to address your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. And so, I think it was the perfect timing, really, because like I said, I was just retired and had a wealth of knowledge, right, from things I felt I did well, but there's also things I didn't do well, and I could pass that on. And I think that he just needed that little bump forward mentally. He had, just before I started working with him, he had grasped the physical side. He turned into a physical specimen, gotten really fit, understood that side of the game. But even having done that, he still had some doubts whether he could play with the upper echelon of players. And I think I helped alleviate some of those doubts. And, that's all you really want to do as a coach, right? Your biggest mission as a coach is try to get your protege or your pupil to fulfill their potential. And ultimately, you can tell them, till it gets dark that they're a great player and they can do this, but until they actually believe it, like I said, it's really limited how much progress they can make.
Obviously, when he opened up, his documentary was phenomenal. And the strength that he showed in telling his story, how did that give you strength, Mark, in learning about everything that, and you were right there with him and you helped him along the way for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Obviously, I was coaching him at the time, myself and his trainer, Christian Lacasio. I remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, we were a little bit, at least I personally, I won't speak for Christian. I was caught off guard a little bit. And Marty had asked me a couple things that now that I reflect back on a couple months leading up to it, now I understand where his mind was,
Hmm.
that he was kind of struggling. And it was hard for me to understand it, probably just because I'm a pretty positive, outgoing person as far as a lot of things, and I had always felt like, wow, Marty's top 10 in the world, and I'd always viewed it. Listen, if you're a professional athlete, life's as good as it's ever going to be, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're spoiled, we're treated great. We're getting to play a sport that we didn't play for money. That's not why we got into it. We got into it because we love that particular sport. Of course, it changes over time with pressure and titles and rankings and points and all those things. But ultimately, I never really lost sight of the core of playing a sport for a living. There's ups and downs, no doubt, but at the end of the day, there's nothing better, in my opinion, than playing a professional, playing a sport and becoming a professional in it. And so I think that, I think for Marty, it was just he was struggling a little bit with that, right? So it took me a while to kind of process, like, where's the disconnect here. And like I said, Marty was at the forefront, right? No one had ever really spoken about it. Nobody, of course, people had issues about it in the past, but especially in tennis, which is such a individual game, one on one, from the minute you step foot on site, you don't want to show any vulnerability, nothing, because you've got all your opponents in the locker room, in the lounge. You want to put on this air that you are confident, strong, nothing phases you. And let's face it, hey, that's not reality, right? Everybody has their down moments, everybody has their tough days. So, what Marty did was, I think he's a little bit before his time. I mean, I think if he was playing nowadays, right, he'd be on the cover of Time magazine probably, because it was so brave what he did. I mean, you don't, especially in tennis, you do not show any vulnerability. Like, you're deemed weak, you're deemed all these things that, all these adjectives that just, you weren't said back then. But in the end, it was brave, courageous, strong. It was exactly the opposite, for Marty. And he's helped so many, not just athletes. I mean, it's interesting because in the last couple of years, Marty and I are still great friends. We spend a lot of time together. And a lot of people that come up to me on the street or wherever I am, they don't understand necessarily that we're great friends, but they know they connect me with tennis. And all they talk about is Marty Fish. And they don't talk about Marty Fish, the tennis player. They talk about Marty Fish, the mental health advocate, the braveness for him to come forward, the path that he created for so many others. So, I was very brave, very courageous by Marty.
So well put. Mark Knowles is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. He's done so much, Marty, for others. You continue to do so much. And what I've noticed, Mark, about you is loyalty is really one of your core values, given how much you give back, how much you give back in the Bahamas to those who need help, understanding, as you talked about earlier, Mark, how that was a place that gave you your launch pad and you didn't have it easy growing up. Why is loyalty and why is helping others in the Bahamas and really being at the forefront of that so important to the fiber of who you are?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, the credit goes to my parents, right? I mean, they instilled great values in me as a young kid. I was always respectful for others. My mom, obviously being British, manners were first and foremost, no matter what. So, first of all the credit has to go to my parents. The environment that I grew up with, brother and sister who were very supportive, which is not easy, right? When there's one sibling that's traveling the world and making headlines and so forth. But the other siblings, my sister Samara, my brother Byron, so supportive and always there for me. So I think that's super important. And then, as far as giving back, I mean, I guess you could say I'm really patriotic in regards to the Bahamas. Like, I had it's an interesting story because when I was about 16 years old, Great Britain had kind of made a pitch to me to come play for Great Britain. All these opportunities, obviously financially, would have been a lot more lucrative than the Bahamas, and I didn't have much money at the time, obviously, but that was never really something that motivated me. I mean, I've always felt like I'm Bahamian, like that's home. I'm very patriotic. The greatest moments in my life, even though I've been number one, I won a couple of majors. Greatest moments in my life were playing Davis Cup for the Bahamas.
Wow.
That goes beyond anything. This small country, small nation, 350,000 people going up against, you know, huge countries like the United States of America, going up against, some South American countries like Brazil and so forth, and Davis Cup, and being victorious against some of them. It just like it gave you this empowerment, right? And I think it's probably the same for all people from small places, right? You just feel like you're going up against the big bad world and you're being successful, right? It kind of gives you that, I don't know, I think it just kind of gives you that it just gives you that adrenaline boost that it's hard to describe. And so, and one thing, I say all the time, and I've said throughout my career, and people know it because a lot of people visit the Bahamas. Obviously, it's one of the top tourist destinations in the world. Bahamian people are the nicest people. I mean, they are so nice. I mean, the support they've given me throughout my career, and it doesn't even have to be when they're there. It's just long
Wow.
distance. It's when I go back home. No matter where it is, they're like, "Oh, I watched you play in that tournament in Germany," and you're like, "How did you watch that?" Right? But they were just so passionate, and the joy that I could see that my tennis brought to them. Obviously, it brought a pressure as well because I wanted to win. I wanted to make us successful. I wanted to make the Bahamas. We're a small nation. We've been lucky to produce some great athletes, and we're all super proud about it. Michael Thompson used to play for the Lakers. Obviously, the father of Clay Thompson. Now that's what he's
Sure.
known as. But even Clay still, even though he's mostly American, he remembers his Bahamian roots. He puts the flag out when they win the NBA Finals. We have a couple of NBA guys, DeAndre Ayton, obviously Buddy Hield. We've had some track stars that have won gold medals through the Olympics. So, it's one of the fun parts, right? About being it's the David against Goliath, being from a small country, going out and trying to achieve on a big scale. So I've just always felt this incredible connection and passion to the Bahamian people, and I'm sure people feel like that when they're from certain countries as well. But it's definitely been very powerful for me.
And I feel that, and I think people see that as well when you're part of the Baja Mar Cup and all that you do on that front as well, and helping others in your country. My final question for you here, and Mark Knowles is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. You talked about the joy that you feel. What's the difference in the joy you feel when, let's say, you're on the tennis court and you're being cheered for, compared to you cheering for your kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, now you understand what your parents were going through. Right? Now I understand. Now I understand why my mom and dad were nervous and certain things. I think as parents, it's not that you care that much about the success of your kids. You just don't want to see them sad, right? That's ultimately. So, depending on how they process winning and losing, ultimately you want them to have the message that you love them no matter what. But as I said, coming from an athletic background, I do understand it. I do understand that the sun is brighter, the bed is more comfortable, the food tastes better when you win. There's no doubt about it. Anyone who tells you different is lying. So, having said that, you just want them to be successful, but you also want to be able to, having played for such a long time, sure, I won a lot, but hey, I lost a lot, right? And anytime you're in competition, anytime you're in athletics, no matter who it is, and that's one of my main messages that I try to pass on to my kids is that no one has had a perfect athletic career. No one, not LeBron James, not Wayne Gretzky, not Tom Brady. Everybody deals with adversity. It's a cliche, but it's who deals with adversity better that's normally more successful, and kind of goes back to the whole mental approach and all those things. Excuse me. And the reality is certain people process that better than others, right? But you can, one thing I learned, which I didn't necessarily believe until my wife instilled it in me, is that you actually can control your mind. You can set your mindset. You can create. And I had examples of it before. A really good friend of mine, one of my best friends, is Jim Courier, and we went to Nick Military Tennis Academy together. He was similar to me. He was tough on himself. He had a temper or whatever. And then one day he just, he's so strong mentally. One day he just said, you know what? I'm going to control the controllables, and I'm never going to lose a match based on something that I shouldn't. In other words, my mental approach, negativity, all those things. And he became obviously one of the strongest mental players on tour on the men's side. So that was a good example of showing that, hey, you can do it, right? And like I said, I was able to transform towards the latter stages of my career. I feel that Marty did that as well. I helped him with that, and we see a lot of players do that. Roger Federer, one of the greatest players of all time, to his own admission at the start of his career, maybe didn't handle adversity as well as he would have liked, but made a great effort, and obviously changed and became probably, I don't know if anyone's ever done it better.
Yeah, and aligned with that mental toughness that he had, obviously his career got better. The mental toughness that you learned to have over the course of your career got you to number one in doubles. And so I think to myself here, Mark, as we sort of wrap up this conversation, if you were number one in doubles in the world with that mental toughness, considering how much your wife helped you with that mental toughness and got you to that plateau, I would think there's got to be a ranking above one in the world that would allot to what the ranking is for you and your wife as a doubles team. That's that's how I would put it. So there's got to be. But Mark Knowles with Tennis Channel, obviously consulting coaches, and we know everything he's done with his career, and obviously formula at UCLA, and always repping Bahamas strong. I'm Bryan Fenley with the USTA. Mark, this was so much fun, man. Really enjoyed this conversation. Brought so much depth, and I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this.
Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it. Thanks for all the work you do, and awesome to be on the show with you.